kick off this topic, I want to start with a couple of reflections from the Africa Climate Summit in all the different engagements that I've had with those working in the carbon markets space. And I've been really moved, invigorated, excited by the number of different organizations and institutions backing the concept of carbon markets. And this really stretches across from communities. Kanyike Sena, who leads a multitude of communities across the whole continent, has been speaking on this topic. Citibank convened bankers from across the continent. We've had many private sector and, of course, project developers talking on the topic. And I think we can all recognize there's been media, a lot of media on this topic over the last decade, and especially around the summit. We have to state very clearly, carbon markets are not perfect. And I think it is not just important, but it is critical that the debate continues, that the issues are raised and discussed in relation to integrity and equity. So carbon markets will fail if we do not hold them to a high bar. It is our duty to the planet. It is our duty to communities in the global south. And there is an enormous amount at stake if we get this wrong. It's an estimated potential influx of $50 billion of capital at the maximum technical potential of carbon markets. It's a lot of money that could be channeled from the global north to the global south. Carbon markets are also one of the only financial mechanisms that are truly democratic. During the climate summit, there was over $650 million worth of capital announced on stage under the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative. Most people, when they think of those numbers, will think of that money going to the corporate and private sectors. But the fact is, with carbon markets, there's a much bigger proportion of that kind of capital that is distributed to communities. There is a massive potential impact in terms of co-benefits. And there is no other mechanism like it that can have that level of impact deeply through an economy. And despite all the criticism of carbon markets, there are very positive projections to 2030. But we need everybody at the table. We need private sector, we need investors, we need communities, and we need everybody doing their utmost to address the issues that have been raised. And we are in a movement where the core carbon principles are being released by ICVCM. VCMI have developed some buyer principles, and Africa Carbon Markets Initiative, who we are supporting, are doing an awful lot of work to raise the bar in terms of integrity across all actors in the supply chain. So that brings me to introduce myself. I am Chania Frost with McKinsey & Company, and I've spent the majority of the last year supporting the African Carbon Markets Initiative, which is set to, well, which has an ambition of scaling carbon markets in Africa by 20-fold by 2030. So my first question to the panelists is, why Africa? What makes Africa a good place for scaling carbon markets? Duncan, I would love to hear your reflection.
Thank you so much, Chania, and good afternoon to you all. I would say Africa is great because, for one, we have a lot of carbon sinks here. We have natural resources that we can use to essentially remove CO2 permanently. I come from the engineered side of carbon dioxide removal. We design and build direct air capture technology. And for us, really, Africa is the best place for this because we have really high penetration of renewable energy, and we have really good storage locations for CO2. So these solutions can scale quite effectively. The other thing that, worth stating is that Africa has been left behind economically as other areas have industrialized. And being able to scale these solutions locally using robust carbon markets it presents an opportunity for Africa to actually develop and industrialize highly decoupled from emissions. And we had James talk very succinctly about it this morning. And so there is a climate justice element to it that though we have not contributed to climate change, we have these solutions here and we are solving climate change. But at the same time, it's an opportunity for us to develop our economies and build people into prosperous lives.
Couldn't agree more. The justice point is such an important one, and one that we must all uphold in terms of the equity and the distribution of revenues, no matter, well, depending on the type of project people are involved with. Now, Nick, Ash, and Caitlin, you bring different perspectives to this space. So Nick with an eye for tech innovation, and Ash with a bigger picture of various stakeholders involved, and Caitlin from your startup investments, what are some noteworthy innovations and activities that are pushing the frontier in your perspectives? Love to start with you, Caitlin.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think I would just change that 500 billion opportunity to a 1.2 trillion opportunity that nature-based and engineered solutions pose around the globe. And we were just at a workshop this morning, which is changing the narrative as opposed to just solving the climate crisis. It's like there is this global movement to buy invisible air. And Africa is so well placed to deliver on that because of how the tectonic plates have come together. There's lava close to the ground, which gives geothermal energy. There's basalt rock, which is ultramafic, which sucks up the carbon dioxide permanently. And there's a huge talent pool on continent that's growing that can help build the solutions that create this. And an example of one of the companies that I led an investment into from the fund that I was at before this was into Interstellar Mineral Storage. They are part of the solution. So Duncan would do the first half of taking really low concentration carbon dioxide from the air and making it really high concentration, 100% CO2. You then need to put that CO2 somewhere. So this company is dissolving it in water, injecting it deep underground into the basalt rock where it mineralizes and stays forever. And you've got companies like Frontier, which is a whole host of different companies coming together, Spotify and a whole bunch of others, that are paying something north of $500 per ton to get these locked away permanently. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of opportunities that are here on continent.
$500 per ton for mineral storage, massive opportunity. Huge investment, of course, required up front, and technology, I think, still very much being developed, but incredible that we have Sela here in Kenya pioneering that. Fantastic. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think we should all be excited about the abatement and removal technologies, but let's not forget, and linking back to your first question, there are millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people in Africa that should be benefiting from the carbon markets just for the small scale activity that they can do by switching fuels, looking at smallholder farmers, looking at locking up carbon in biomass. Let's not, we should be excited about the abate and the removals technology, don't get me wrong, but we can quickly go to other solutions on the ground where we can bring carbon finance down to people doing work on the ground to either switch to a clean fuel or remove carbon in small numbers. And if we're not thinking about Africa, by 2050, 1 in 4 adults on the planet will be on this continent. And as investors, if we're not thinking about that as an investment opportunity, then we're missing something here. There's a huge opportunity. I think we can use digital technology. You know, if you go back 15 years when we launched, 16 years now, we launched M-Pesa. We did it because there was a gap. People couldn't get access to financial services. Today, there's another massive gap. People cannot access carbon market finance. The small to medium-sized projects can't get there, and yet there's no excuse for it. We have digital money. We have the ability to monitor everything down to 30-centimeter size blocks of land using satellite imagery. We have machine-to-machine technology. We can watch a cook stove being turned on and off remotely using digital technology. Why? And we know how to move money around. I could pay someone 30 shillings for a week's worth of electric usage on their cook stove, and we know how to make all of that work. We've got to jump into that and forget these models. I've been working in the carbon markets for a decade before I got into digital finance. The carbon, let's be honest, they're not working. I'm going to be very blunt in the interest of time. If you're a small or medium-sized project, you just won't bother getting into the carbon markets. Let's redesign, thank you very much. Let's get some new microphones and think about how we can, shall I start again? Look, I think we can redesign the carbon markets, and we can make it work for the smallholder farmers, we can make it work for households, we can cover their switching costs to clean energy, and we have all of that technology available today to do it. And we don't need to invent mobile money, we don't need to invent IoT. We know how to move dollars across international borders. That's what we should be doing, and we should be doing it with data backed by independent audits. The core carbon principles are key. There's no excuse to not change the way the markets are working, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Love the point on data. And your point on opportunity reminds me of what John Kerry said on stage on Monday, which is this is the biggest opportunity that the world is facing since the Industrial Revolution, which I think is really poignant. I want to turn to you, Claire. You're pioneering solutions to sell carbon offsets. Can you tell us how that works?
Yeah, I can tell you how we do it, or how we plan to do it. So we rescue food that would otherwise be lost. This food is a methane creator. And by keeping that food in the human food chain, we avoid these CO2 emissions. So we measure that impact and are now on our way to certification. We are just finalizing our feasibility study. So in a nutshell, that's how it works. So we are really doing food avoidance credits. So it's avoidance, and it's really pioneering. They just released the methodology last month, the Verra methodology.
Super inspiring. And in terms of your timeline, when do you think that will be piloted and ready to go?
Yeah, so it does take a lot of times, and Ash, I was actually the first person to tell me how long this takes and how many iterations you have to go through and how many projects and how much capital you need. So it's not accessible unless you have funding or you have fundraised. So it's not accessible to a lot of people. So we started in January, finished the pre-feasibility study. Now we're starting the feasibility study until the end of December, and then we're able to start the actual project starting in January. That will take another year until you have certified. So it is a long-term coming. It is an investment, and there has to be ways to do that much easier. I don't understand why we have to go through so much time.
Yeah, exactly. No, I was just reinforcing that point. It's crazy that we took M-Copa through the gold standard. It took us 2 years, cost us I'd say hundreds of thousands of dollars. You barely wash your face by the time you come through that process. That's not the way to run the carbon markets, and it's crazy that you're having to do that. If you're monitoring that methane capture with using digital technology that can be independently verified, what's to stop you putting those credits together much more quickly than going through the traditional standards where these guys are taking fees and time out of the process? And so
I think it's such an important point. People often don't recognize how expensive, how time-consuming, how much capacity capability is required even just to navigate the system of going through the verification, validation, and there's a massive bottleneck in terms of access to the verifying bodies and their auditors as well. And that can be a huge time constraint and constraint to cash flow because you can't actually issue your credits when you need them. So, yeah.
And one thing to add, like for us, you need expertise. You need to really understand how the market works. You need to understand how the verification. You need a person who really understands that. So it's time, it's money, and it's getting that expertise in-house, which is also a major barrier for a lot of companies.
100%. Now we've talked a bit about frustrations. I'd love to hear from you, Duncan. Also, what have been the main things that have been frustrating or hindering on your journey?
So our market is just emerging for engineered removals. We are working with Puro as our validator, and we're using their methodology for quantification of CO2 removed. Ours has somewhat been easier. I think Puro has seen the frustrations of Carbon Markets 1.0 and has been working to make it easier, especially for startups. In our sector, it's a sector of startups who don't have those hundreds of thousands of dollars or that expertise to really go through that entire certification process. They are expensive, however. The good thing is that they hold our hands basically right from the very beginning, so we don't pay any upfront costs, and they help us throughout the entire process. So we're very grateful to the folks at Puro for that. And I empathize, and maybe if I can just still, I wonder if that, whether you think, maybe Nick or Ash, whether you think that's the reason mainly why a lot of the value is not going to the local communities. Do you think that a lot of the value created from the sale of carbon credits is lost within the certification process with all these fees and middlemen? I don't know, what do you guys think? Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big problems with the carbon value chain is that it is so intermediated, and you have kind of incentives all along the value chain that are incentivized towards scale, not necessarily quality. And you have developers and brokers who often operate on revenue share models, and so they're incentivized to try to take their kind of slice of the pie. And so what happens is that $1 of carbon that ultimately gets sold in terms of revenue, often by the time it gets back to the project, it might be 30 cents. And so one of the things that I think is a really big opportunity for innovation and to try to clean up this industry is to try to create models where kind of supply and demand can be more directly connected, to have less intermediaries who are taking a piece of the pie, and ultimately to have more value go back into the project, go back into the community, and to achieve the outcomes. I think a lot of this as well is resulting in many buyers trying to cut out middlemen as well. So you're seeing some large corporates and buyers now trying to develop their own projects because they're basically saying we can't trust all of these people in the middle with our money to do this efficiently, and we kind of want to go direct to market. So absolutely it's a big problem. And also to Claire's earlier point, it costs a ton of money to bring these projects to market. You need a few $100,000. And part of the big value add of developers is that they take care of everything for you. So not only are they providing expertise, they're providing finance, and they say, in exchange for us bringing your project to market and providing the expertise that you need, we'll provide the funding so that you don't pay anything and your project gets to market. But what a lot of projects don't realize is they're actually not getting a very good deal, because on the back end, they're going to pay 30 or 40% of their revenue to this developer. And so what we really need is access to capital for these projects.
Yeah, just to build on that. So with some funding from the UK government, FSD Africa here, and the Shell Foundation, we're building a pure digital platform that has third-party verification, but it's all about the data. And we must remember the carbon market's been around a long time. I mean, they failed a couple of times as well. But the science of how to calculate a carbon credit is the science. And if we can digitalize that, I think we can cut out a lot of these costs in the middle. And this platform we're building is called the Carbon Value Exchange, or CAVEX, and it's intended to do just that. Let's get 90% of the sale price back to the projects on the ground. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing that sort of proportion of revenue back on the ground and into the communities doing the work. And unfortunately, we're living with a legacy system. It's a bit like, there is a parallel to the financial access debate in, when turn of the century and the Millennium Development Goals, where we're thinking, how on earth do we get into financial inclusion for everybody? Things like M-Pesa work because you have to put aside the old models and use digital technology to drive a new one out. And it does get uncomfortable. So yeah, of course the standards bodies are going to say, look, that's not the way we do it this way, and we've been doing it this way for 20 years. But if we keep that mindset, we will never change in time. We have to use the digital technology we've got and try and really think about how do we get high impact, high quality money going down to those organizations and people on the ground doing the work.
Couldn't agree more. Caitlin.
Thanks. I think, Nick, we absolutely need the digital technology. We also need the hardware. And the example I used was direct air capture and underground sequestration. That's an example. it's a way that we can also access markets more quickly. So an example, there is a guy in Kisumu who is taking the water hyacinth out of Lake Victoria, fermenting it, and using it for biofuel. Not only can that biofuel, you can get carbon credits from that, you can also get a pure stream of carbon dioxide from the fermentation process that's coming off it. And where I'm been sitting is all the innovations there's someone in Oxford with an idea about how this could happen and raising so much money off it, but actually it's already happening on the ground here. So it's how do we get the innovators and operators who are building the hardware to access the capital that's available for these sometimes IP-rich, hardware-intensive innovations. So that's just another example where bringing different types of capital together.
Yeah, I want to take us back a little as well to the point of the amount that brokers are needing to take, that brokers take. I think there's a major problem with opacity. Buyers across the world have a real problem understanding what projects are out there, how to get directly to the project developers. They essentially have no other choice than to go through brokers, and so brokers have a sort of monopolized situation where they can charge what they like. With Africa Carbon Markets Initiative, one thing that we are supporting them to do is develop a carbon credit showcase. So this is essentially a catalog of all the different, well, not all, whoever applied, but a showcase of projects, over 90 projects across the continent, and spread across 20 countries, 65 project developers, and includes a push for transparency on co-benefits, on revenue sharing, on these metrics that should drive a higher price, but also just bring to market what is not currently available to the buyers. I think it'll be really important. It's getting noisy. I think, should we open it up to questions from the audience? And then we can close. Why don't we take 10 minutes of questions? Do we have any questions from the audience?
Questions? We have questions out there. Yep, one. Someone else? I know where to come position myself.
Hi everyone. I wanted to ask, what's your opinion on having corresponding adjustments attached to voluntary credits?
Just repeat that for me.
Oh, sorry. What's your opinion, for anyone on the panel, of having corresponding adjustments attached to voluntary credits?
Anyone want to take that?
I think this is an area that's evolving at the moment. I think the whole market is going to push towards Article 6, and eventually I think all buyers are going to look for authorized units, irrespective of whether they're buying on the VCM or in compliance markets. And so I think that at the moment it's really unclear the situations in which a corresponding adjustment needs to be attached. And there is a lack of transparency across the different mechanisms. So for example, like CORSIA versus a VCM transaction versus an Article 6 bilateral transaction. There is really a lack of clarity under which circumstances should a corresponding adjustment be attached. And so this is all being built in real time, and there's not a lot of transparency around it right now. I think what's really important is that we can build towards a shared understanding of this, because many buyers are being spooked by this, and there's a real risk of double counting if it's not done properly. And so I guess it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer in which I don't have a hard view on yes or no corresponding adjustments. What I think we need is a shared understanding of the circumstances under which we need to have them and what that looks like, so that the market can participate and not be concerned about, double counting or greenwashing.
Maybe just a short addition to that. I think it's going to be really important to help countries think through what kind of credits they want to forfeit and sell to other countries and not have them count towards their own NDCs. If all the cheapest credits, cheapest projects are sold to the global north, African countries won't be able to meet their own NDCs without major investment in the much more expensive projects. So countries like India have taken the stance of saying the only projects we will sell via corresponding adjustments are like green hydrogen and just the super expensive types of projects that they currently don't have capital for. So there's something to be said for helping countries protect their own carbon assets as well in their own NDC journeys. Another question?
Yes, so my first question is, what are some of the solutions off the top of your head to avoid potential greenwashing claims, to developing carbon offset projects, given that some of the traditional standard bodies have been implicated in these scandals?
Great question. Anyone want to take it?
Okay, so for number two, in terms of MRV requirements within the carbon markets, how can data from small-scale projects be leveraged towards national reporting?
I'm happy to take the first one. I think as these markets are evolving and standards are coming together, if you just focus on the data and really getting high quality, rigorous data from the get-go, the markets will sort themselves out. So making sure even in the smallhold agriculture application, when you're measuring the soil before you're restoring it, make it deep enough that you get the whole root length, get the bulk density as well as the dry carbon, get all the different factors to get the baseline, so that by the time the markets have caught up with what's happening, you've got the data to back how you've improved it over time. Do you want to add to it?
Yeah, I'll add to it on the data from smaller projects, but that's perfectly possible now. We have a few things have changed. The cost of accessing good quality networks, like the GSM network, 10 years ago it would have been quite hard and very expensive. That's not the case anymore. You can get GSM modems at $2. You have to put that technology into the kit if you're monitoring kit, or you have to use satellite imagery down to high resolution to pull it back if you're looking at land use carbon sources. But it's perfectly possible. I think we've sort of got ourselves stuck thinking that that's hard and expensive. It's really not. And I think you can do the aggregation on the cloud. So you pull the data in according to protocols. Things get kicked out unless you're getting a date stamp, a time stamp, a location stamp. You can collect the data you need remotely at a fair cost. That can then all be aggregated on the cloud. There you can run your data assessment, looking for anomalies, doing the cleanup, making sure that it's verifiable. And then out of that, you can aggregate up to the carbon credits. So I think we're worrying too much about the technology behind that, because we know how to do that, and we have the networks and the infrastructure to do it today.
Nicely said. Any more questions?
Sorry, let me just add one thing.
Please
on
add
that
to it,
first
Duncan.
question.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is also third parties. I think we've spoken to a lot of buyers, and buyers generally have different priorities. There are buyers who care about biodiversity, there are buyers who care about permanence, there are buyers who care about additionality, and they have different priorities. So there are folks who are really innovating in ways of really quantifying the metrics of your project on these different aspects, and you can have really a great credit score. You can imagine it like a credit score, and that's what we're doing also for our own project, which can also help a buyer to make an informed decision based on the priorities that they have. And they'll assess you, they'll send verifiers to really quantify everything that you're doing and the claims that you're making, and that helps build trust with them.
One other thing, I think we also, in this conversation about greenwashing, it's really important that the carbon markets can achieve their objective. And one big lever there is around price, which I'll put to one side. But I also think that some of these witch hunts and some of the Guardian articles, for example, in which many corporates that are participating in the VCM get lambasted, is really, really unhelpful. We need to remember that the market is voluntary. Corporates are choosing to participate. They don't have to. And without them, without buyers, there is no market. And I speak to so many corporates who are basically saying, we're not participating right now because we're too scared that we're going to do the wrong thing. That reputational risk is so massive that corporates would rather not participate than risk getting hung out to dry. And so I also think that we need to start cutting folks a little bit of slack who are actually putting capital into this sector, because without them, it's just not going to exist.
I think that's a really good point, right? We need to move this, and I agree with you. Not participating at all is also a huge risk.
Just hearing this morning that someone's mic's on. The major oil and gas companies are really being pulled over the coals, of course, because of their historical emissions. Many of them are obviously moving their entire strategies towards renewables and have set net zero targets. Okay, yes, we have the historical emissions, but if you look at the current footprints, in terms of what differentiates them from, say, major tech giants which have huge footprints, the oil and gas companies are still the ones that when they engage, when they've set their SBTI targets, when they've set their net zero targets, they engage in carbon credit offsets, they're developing their renewable energy portfolios, they are still being hammered for buying carbon credits. And those companies, if they pull out of the market altogether, that is a huge buyer loss. And I'll speak to any project developer here in terms of the risk that that poses over the next decade. So I think the narrative has to be very careful around who is buying. Sure, if they're still doing significant exploration and development and then buying credits, that's a totally different story. But if they're actually on a pathway to net zero and this is part of their pathway, we need to actually recognize that.
Yeah, just to add to that point is, I think Otavia has a very different, we talked about this before, has a very cool model because your product is carbon, but if you don't have that kind of product, personally, you have to be really thinking about how reliant your business model should be on carbon credits, thinking about the development of everything and how it's going.
Can I just add on? I guess oil and gas is always posed to be this really bad beast in the room, but actually we're the ones that's still demanding the carbon from underground that they're extracting. So it's how do we leverage the infrastructure that they've used to pull the carbon out of the ground, to use it and then put it back in the ground. And there are some really thoughtful investors, like I'm going to call out Shell Ventures and Equinor, who have whole teams thinking about which innovations they can invest into so that when it gets to the time that the innovations are large enough that they can scale, they can use their existing distribution channels to infiltrate everywhere around the world. So I think it's helpful to have these giants on the journey as well, but also doing it in a way that's transparent and authentic, absolutely.
I think we do one more question. We have 4 minutes before half the hour. Anyone else? No? This is a very good panel. Like, I really enjoy it. I was like taking notes and things.
Thank you. I think you guys partially answered my question, but maybe I will ask it again explicitly. What do you think are the current and what will be the future positive and negative drivers creating demand, especially for voluntary carbon credits?
Let me take a stab and then I'll pass around, but just very briefly, one of the major ones will be the approaching deadlines for people's net zero targets. So as we reach 2030 and then again in 2040, and companies approach their deadlines, they will have residual emissions that they will want to offset. So the projections towards those time horizons is that there will be a massive demand spike so that people can actually meet their targets. But I'll pass on to others.
Yeah, just to add, I think there's a really interesting dynamic. We talk about this on the CAVEX team a lot. If you're regulated into buying credits, and we've heard a lot this week through the Nairobi Declaration around the need for global tax, driving hard at those compliance markets, most finance directors around the world are going to go, okay, I've got to do this. Find me the lowest cost, potentially lowest quality credit anywhere. Which is that really what we want? Whereas in the beauty of the voluntary markets is you've got companies doing it because they know that's the right thing for them to do because their consumers want it and there's a generation of employees that want it. So they're going to go out and they're going to look for credits as part of a story. I think it has to be part of a journey. But will they pay a premium for a high impact carbon credit? So if my $12 goes to a smallholder farmer, the impact of that is massive compared to my $2 going to a North American timber credit. So I think there's a really interesting dynamic between impact and cost, and I think we've got to get the markets working properly, and we'll see how that plays out. But my gut feel is we will see higher prices for high impact credits. But I'd love to debate it.
No, I just had one point on price. I just think one of the biggest things that undermine the market at the moment is cheap credits. If I started a company selling $15 Rolexes, you would say, cool, your Rolexes are obviously fake and your company is probably unethical. Like, the whole idea that people can buy carbon credits for $5 a ton is a joke. You cannot do all of the things that are required in order to manage a rigorous, real carbon project for $5. I don't care what it is. Even if it's a forestry project, it takes a ton of effort to be able to plant trees, to look after them, to put in place the community infrastructure, the community engagement needed to make that project work over a 30 to 50-year horizon. And so we need to clear the market of cheap credits. We need a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. And I think we're starting to get there, but it's a huge area of innovation as well, of how do we actually develop the tools to be able to measure and properly report on these projects, to show what good looks like and to rid the market of the bad. And until then, I think the market will continue to be undermined.
Wow.
Can I? Yeah. To your question, what's going to drive it? I don't know. None of us do, and I definitely don't have a behavioral economics background. But I do have an engineering background, and I think the climate science shows us that in every scenario, if every company does everything that it can to hit net zero, we still have to be removing 5 to 10 billion tons of carbon per year. And the capacity that we have right now is 0.025% of that. So this industry, by the end of 2100, has to grow from almost a standing start to $1 trillion. It's bigger than the oil and gas industry in a shorter amount of time. So if you look at the numbers, people are going to get at it from that way. I think there's a lot of other drivers that will get there, but we'll have to get there eventually if we want to save the planet.
Can I even just ask before she continues, what about disasters, generally? You know, what country was it where there was the largest fire I've ever seen in a lifetime, and then it flooded the next day? Was that Brazil? Some place like that? I was watching it on TV in the morning. I think disasters are something, I'm not one of them, but I'm just thinking disasters are going to be a big push. We, as a country, Kenya as a country, we're deforesting faster than we ever have in our lifetimes. So I just think disasters are a thing we should think about as well.
Totally, and I think the fires that were happening and affecting the whole of New York made people really feel like everyone is going to be affected by this, whether you are in a mansion or in a not a mansion, it's going to affect everyone, and everyone's waking up to that. I think another really useful tool for making corporates wake up to it is through legal action. So there's a company called Client Earth, who, for instance, is taking Cargill to court for deforestation of the Amazon rainforest because of planting for soy feed. The more responsible corporates who are holding themselves to account for what their goals are, I think the better, and legal action is a really powerful tool for that.
Fantastic. I'm going to close by saying currently Africa is only meeting 1% of its total carbon credit potential, with anywhere between 500 billion and 1.3 trillion potential capital inflows into the continent to finance green development. So I want to thank our panelists. I think it's been a very interesting conversation, and thank the audience for listening and your excellent questions. Thank you.
Let's give them a hand, ladies and gentlemen. This was a really good panel. Thank you all for making the time to come on stage. We're going to take a short, not a break really, we're just going to jump into clean tech pitches. So we're going to call out all the clean tech founders who are going to pitch next to come somewhere around here, sit on the front stage, and then we're also going to be looking for our judges to put them on the couches at the front. But take the opportunity to say hello to someone, maybe say hi to someone on the panel that you want to talk to, and catch a drink at the bar inside.